President Donald Trump is a very divisive figure, whose public persona centers on his wealth. Trump has portrayed himself for years as a self-made billionaire who began his career with just $1 million loan from his father. But it turns out that Fred Trump, Donald's father, had a much greater influence on his son's rise to fame. We're going to examine the real source of Trump's billions of dollars. Welcome to the Financial Flow. Please like and subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay up on our latest videos. The rise of Donald's father nearly a century ago is where the tale of his wealth begins. Fred Trump was a genuine con man. Fred had to learn how to work after losing his father when he was 12 years old, and he chose the construction industry. By the time he was 20 years old, he had constructed his first residential home. He also entered this industry at the perfect time. Fred was eager to take advantage of the very affordable loans and subsidies that the New Deal offered in order to promote residential construction, among other goals. In fact, beginning the New Deal and continuing through the World War II's military housing program and the post-war housing boom made possible by the GI Bill. America enacted housing subsidies one after the other beginning in the 1930s. In just 3 decades, the home ownership rate in America increased by 20%, and Fred Trump amassed a fortune, in large part thanks to the enormous amounts of government assistance he was given. He received a $26 million loan from the FHA in 1949 alone, to erect Shore Haven and Beach Haven, 2 apartment buildings in Brooklyn. What's interesting, however, is not that he became wealthy using government funds, which is actually fairly typical, but rather the fact that he started a significant campaign of giving money to his children at the age of just 40. He employed a variety of straightforward but efficient techniques. Fred used his company to buy the land on which those 2 apartment buildings in Brooklyn would be erected. He then gave the land to the trust and established a trust with his children as the beneficiaries. Now that the land was no longer owned by Fred's construction company, he would lease it from the trust under the terms of a ground lease agreement. In accordance with this agreement, the trust would receive more than $60,000 annually for the following 99 years, providing Donald, who was only 3 years old at the time, with a consistent source of income. But the ground leases were only the beginning because over the following 20 years, Fred would start to give his children ownership of the actual buildings. He would use government funds to purchase a piece of land through an empty corporation, then erect apartments there while giving his children direct ownership of the business. You can see from looking through his tax returns that he only paid gift tax on one of the 8 buildings that he transferred in this manner. In 1968, he invested $2.5 million in building it through a partnership, and a year later, he gave 15% of the partnership to each of his children. If you do the calculations, the gift tax should have been close to $100,000, but he only paid $6.50. Of course, it's important to remember that Fred Trump was repeatedly investigated by the state of New York for underpaying his taxes in the 1950s and 1960s. Despite these problems, he was able to easily secure millions of dollars in subsidies, probably because of his political connections. In fact, it was during this time that Fred constructed the Trump Village, which he would later pass down to Donald and for which he received $50 million from the state of New York. Naturally, Donald started working for his father in 1968 after receiving his degree from college. Donald and his father established a partnership in 1972 to obtain a $8 million loan for the construction of Prospect Tower. Even though Fred did all the work, Donald received the majority of the earnings. In addition to his share of the partnership, he also received management and consulting fees, as well as any rent the tenants paid for air conditioner rentals. By 1975, Donald's annual income from that building alone was over $300,000. Of course, Fred wanted to establish a good reputation for Donald in order to help him launch his career, not just to enrich him. Donald's net worth was estimated at $200 million in a 1976 profile, but the projects he was claiming as his own belonged to his father. Donald was the president of the Trump Organization at the time, which came with a sizable salary, but he also routinely received loans from Fred. Donald received loans from his father's businesses in 1979, totaling $3 million, and it's interesting to note how these loans were set up. Although they did come with some interest, it was paid back as soon as the loan was obtained, and since there was no set schedule for repayment, Donald was free to keep the money indefinitely. By the end of the 1980s, all the distribution channels had given Donald access to close to $50 million from his father's empire. But this only gave him more confidence to take even bigger chances. He paid more than $400 million for the Plaza Hotel in 1988, and a year later, he invested more than $350 million in Eastern Airlines, which he renamed Trump Shuttle. The most well-known of all, of course, is Donald's entry into the Atlantic City casino industry. The important part is that Fred kept things afloat when Donald's casino started to falter in the early 1990s, despite the fact that the story is lengthy enough for a separate video. Before bankruptcy proceedings could restructure the debts to give the casinos more time to repay the loans. He personally gave Donald millions to keep his casinos from going into default on their obligations. In fact, the same year, Trump Palace sold 57 condos for a combined price of more than $50 million. Fred's health started to deteriorate in the early 1990s, and he even started to show signs of dementia. He started an impressive program to siphon everything he had left to them without paying estate taxes, before he passed away because he still didn't have transferred the majority of his wealth to his children. His children established a maintenance business in 1992, and it quickly took on the role of subcontractor for all of Fred's structures. Fred's properties began using this one company for all of the millions of dollars in repairs and upgrades, and they all came with a hefty markup. The cost for Fred's empire significantly increased over the following few years. In an effort to further drain Fred's empire of funds, Donald and his siblings took over management of his buildings in 1994. By 1999, the strategies Fred devised were earning each of his children $2.2 million annually. When the time came to actually transfer the properties, the only consideration was the value of the buildings. So Donald and his siblings enlisted the aid of a renowned real estate appraiser to assist them with their issue. He used a number of strategies to reduce the cost of 25 apartment buildings with 7,000 units to just $40 million. The most amusing approach was how he determined that 2 buildings in Trump Village had a negative value. In order to raise rents, Fred removed those 2 buildings from an affordable housing program in 1992. However, by doing so, he forfeited the tax exemption they had received under the program. If you base your valuation on this one-time accounting charge, the building appears to be unprofitable even though it wasn't. Fred ultimately spent $20 million transferring his entire real estate empire. When Fred passed away in 1999, he only had $2 million in the bank, and all the assets he had accumulated over 7 decades were now in the possession of his children. Early in 2004, Fred Trump's legacy came to an end when Donald and his siblings and their father sold the empire he had spent his entire life building to a New York City real estate investor for $700 million. Even though he received a tremendous boost from his father, Donald did accomplish a lot on his own, as evidenced by the fact that he has continued to run a business since then, and that his net worth is currently estimated to be around $3 billion. In addition, even if Fred Trump's tax evasion techniques were found to be unlawful, the statute of limitations has long since passed, so Donald can only be punished with fines. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Have a good one.